Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 25 of the Galactic Window Space Podcast. My name is Nick. I'm commonly known as the Orbital Alliance here on the internet.
And my name is Tan, also known as Chasing the Milk.
It's good to have everybody here for this episode. You might notice that we are not live streaming like we typically do on our Monday nights. We have pre-recorded this episode with our special guest ahead of time, and we are broadcasting it as a premiere here on YouTube. So if you guys are joining live and listening to us now in the chat, we will not be able to participate with you like we usually do. However, don't let that stop you from hanging out with your spacey astro friends in there, ask questions, get to know each other, and get excited about tonight's episode. We'll be back live next week. So Tan, what's up?
Not too much, man. I'm feeling good. I'm excited that we've made it this far, episode 25. We're climbing, man. We're climbing
Our podcast can rent a car now.
Yes. Yes. The big 25.
We've been having that little fun game about seeing how gauging the episode numbers as age. we were first we were able to vote, then we could purchase adult beverages, and then now we can rent a car out there somewhere.
Yeah. Getting really close to the midlife crisis
Yeah.
episode soon. Excited for that one.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, let's look forward to it.
Yeah.
Oh man,
How you
that's
feeling?
funny. Oh, no, I'm feeling so good.
Okay,
I've been
cool.
very much looking forward to this episode. I'll explain in a little bit, but I feel like it's kind of been like a year in the making, so to speak. So yeah, can't say enough about like how ready I am to have the conversation today.
Cool. Awesome. Likewise.
For those of you who are tuning in for the very first time, just want to give you sort of the nutshell explanation of what our podcast is about. At its core, we love to talk about space and astronomy, space flight, everything kind of in that sector. But we also want to invite people on as guests onto our show where we get to take a unique look through their galactic window, which was sort of the concept that we made up as a kind of a explanation for how we all receive the night sky differently. Like, even though all of us can walk outside in our front yards, look up and see the same thing, we receive it differently and uniquely. We see things with our own perspective, and that makes us unique as individuals. And I think it's important to capture each of those stories pertaining to how we see the night sky. So guests might have a story that is looking at the same thing you do, but has an incredible power to it. And we just want to make space to, pun intended, showcase that as often as we possibly can. So if you're new here, grateful that you stopped by, and we hope that you continue to stick around with us in future episodes.
Yep. As always, I got to remind you guys to grab your drinks and snacks. Every episode is great, but tonight I feel like, this one is out of this world.
Yes, it is. Tan, do you want to talk a little bit, before we get started here, what's happening in the night sky this week?
Yeah. So first up, we've got a full beaver moon on the 15th. So for all you guys that are moon lovers or lunatics, mark your calendars, go out and watch it. Try to catch it when it's coming up on the horizon. That's when it's going to look the biggest. It's my favorite time to photograph it because you get this cool little moon illusion effect where it just seems really, really big. It feels kind of surreal sometimes. So mark your calendars for that. And then we also have a meteor shower. We have the Leonids on the 17th. Yeah, so it'll be peaking on the 17th, meaning it's going to be the best night to go out and watch it. So mark your calendars for that as well.
Well, keep in mind, too, that these dates are technically leading up to this episode, but that doesn't mean those events won't be visible to some degree. Like, obviously, the moon will be out of full phase by the time this premieres. And then the meteor shower, you'll still have a good chance to see stuff the next day. So just keep that in mind, too. Anything else we're thinking about in the night sky?
Not that I know of.
I know that the planet Venus is beautiful after sundown. So
that's right. It's
yes.
It's making its way to the becoming an evening star now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's putting on that show. It's not getting lost in the sunlight. It's rising a little bit higher every night, and then I don't know when it starts to go back down again. Couple months? I gotta look that up. open up Stellarium after this.
Yeah, definitely worth looking. I think that's usually one of the things that people are kind of get excited about, especially on the little tinfoil hat side. People will see that and kind of freak out and think it's the government or something. But Venus is really, really bright. If you haven't seen it yet, definitely go out towards the evening and keep an eye out for it in the western skies right after sundown.
Thanks for reminding me. I need to go hide my tinfoil hat after this. I shove it in the closet. Oh, man. Cool. Yeah, well, we just want to give you guys a little bit of a heads up of some of the things you could be looking for when you go outside. And most of these things are visible without assistance. So you don't need binoculars or a telescope or expensive equipment, cameras or anything like that to see the moon or a meteor shower or the planets. Download a free night sky app for a little bit of guidance if you need. But just go out and enjoy the night sky. And we just thought you could have a little, taste spoon of what's coming up here this week.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, are you ready to bring on our guests?
I'm so ready. Let's do it, man.
All right, here we go. Let's do it. Today, we're humbled to have Stacey Morgan, author of The Astronaut's Wife, How Launching My Husband into Space Changed the Way I Live on Earth, on the Galactic Window. Stacey is the wife of NASA astronaut Drew Morgan, who launched aboard a Russian Soyuz spacecraft to the International Space Station in 2019. In her book, she chronicles the stories and learnings from her life on Earth while Drew was living aboard the ISS, and also how she cared for herself and her family while Drew was deployed to an active war zone in Afghanistan. She also shares how both her faith and support from her local community helped her successfully navigate these challenging seasons of her life. In recent years, Stacey has appeared on dozens of podcasts and currently works for Momco as an executive leadership coach, helping military moms all over the world never feel like they're alone. We're, of course, beyond thrilled to have Stacey with us today, so let's give her a warm and spacey Stacey welcome to the show. Hey, Stacey, welcome to the Galactic Window.
Welcome.
Hi, what a great intro. And Spacey Stacey was my Garbage Pal kid sticker name. So that's super fun.
Let's go.
Yes.
Love it.
That's incredible. Oh my gosh. Well,
That's
I'm
perfect.
glad that that all worked out. Oh man, it's seriously really great to have you here on the show with us. I mentioned earlier, I've had this in my mind to meet you at some point for quite a while. I listened to your book, The Astronaut's Wife, on an audiobook. I believe it was last summer while I was mowing my lawn. Every time I went out, I just did a little bit more. And I was like, man, this story is so good. And I hope to get a chance to meet Stacey and talk more about this with her and her experiences. So here we are. And I'm just glad that you made the time to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me. I appreciate it.
For sure. Yeah. So there's a lot to talk about. But of course, your book, The Astronaut's Wife, is sort of the connecting dots here. Hey, look at that. Nice. Where'd you get that?
That's right.
Let's just start there. Like, I mean, you're an author, which is an incredible accomplishment that I think most people have on their bucket list, and very few actually achieve that. Like, what's it like to hold your own book?
It's great. I will tell you, this is my first book. I hope it's not my last, but this was my first, and it's a grind, right? Like when you read from authors who do like a book a year, you're like, how do they even do this? Like, I don't know how these professionals do it. I mean, because it is a lot of work to write, and it's hard to write about your own life. I found for me, it required a level of introspection that maybe I don't normally bring to every aspect of my life. So it was an interesting process to have to sit and actually ask yourself, like, how did I feel in that moment? Or how were people interacting with me, and what was that like? And so it's interesting to kind of like think back and go through that process. So it's a little bit mentally tougher than I thought it would be. But also just, it's like, it's hours, it's a grind, it's sitting and writing. And then you have to have tough skin as your editors come back to you when you're all done and ask you hard questions like, what do you mean by this? And I don't think this is as clear as you think it is. And you're like, oh, okay, let me fix that. So you can't take it personally, knowing that in the end, they just want you to have the best product possible. But I encourage everybody to write down things about their life. You don't have to have a spouse go to space in order to have a compelling story to share with the world. And so, when in doubt, write it down, even if it's just like for your own family history, so that your great grandkids can know more about what you were like. I think it's a worthwhile endeavor.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of chronicling and trying to sort of set up that time capsule of your life, like for the next generation. That's like a big meaningful thing for me. I've just very few trinkets from a couple generations down the line, and they mean the world to me. So what a amazing effort that you've done to put that together. And I have no doubt that, your grandkids and so on will be so thankful to have every single word of that. That's impressive.
I love that. I think this is kind of my sign to start writing again. I had no recollection of the last time I journaled anything. I have an old diary, and it's interesting because I found it recently while I was cleaning up some stuff, and there were entries from, it was like 2001. It was pretty consistent. You see some 2002, and then it skips to 2007, and then 2014. And I think the last entry was maybe 2020 during COVID, and I think we're gonna have to add one more before the year ends here. So
once a year, that's good.
Yeah.
You just have to send a 5-year. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, it's journaling is so good. I'm not a big journaler. Like, I don't want to pretend like I'm something. I was not a big journaler, but I would keep this kind of running document just on my computer that I'd type into every once in a while, because when we'd had a very interesting married life just through what we were doing in the military for a long time. But certainly when my husband got selected by NASA in 2013, the interest level of random and weird things that our family now got to be a part of multiplied considerably. And, we were there for, it's a long process from selection to actual space flight. And so, you're living in that world for a long time. And so I kind of just keeping a running record of this happened today, and just, it was very valuable when writing the book. I mean, I did not intend go into that thinking, oh, I'm going to write a book in 5 years or 6 years or 10 years or whatever. It was kind of a series of happy accidents that led to that point. But I will say, when we first got to NASA, I'm kind of I knew nothing really. I'm really my intro of the book talks about how I unashamedly knew very little about space, other than just what was taught to me in school, what I remembered from watching on television, but mostly movies like Apollo 13. And so when my husband got selected and it was this is going to be our life, I thought, well, I should read some stuff. I guess I'll finally watch the right stuff with my husband, who's been begging me to watch this with him for years. And let me read whatever I can and learn more about what is it like? There's plenty of stuff out there about what it's like from the astronaut's perspective, from Hollywood and from autobiographies and stuff, tons of astronaut autobiographies. But when it came to the family, what is it like for the families? There was very little. There was really only one book, and that was the Astronaut Wives Club, which was not written by an astronaut spouse directly. It was written through some interviews with the original wives. And it's there's a little bit of controversy within that community about whether or not they feel collectively as if it's a true telling or not. But it was the only option available, and I read it, and it was I really enjoyed it. And later on, a couple years later, actually got to meet a number of those original wives, and it was awesome to talk to them. And what really stuck out to me, though, was man, these women are incredible. What they experienced was incredible. Even though some of the aspects of that narrative they may disagree with, there were a lot of things that still read true from their experience in the 1960s and 70s to the 2000s, and it's sad to me that more of their stories are not out there, because they may not have gone to space like their husbands did, but what they experienced was equally challenging, bizarre sometimes, just just like we were figuring out space flight, NASA was also figuring out how to handle families. Like, how do you support families? How do you even communicate with families? And what level of information do you give them? And how do you manage the incredible level of stress that these families are experiencing while we are literally putting the husband and dad in a space capsule and just kind of like hoping it all works out right? And if it doesn't, what happens afterwards? Like, really interesting stories, and unfortunately not that many captured for kind of like for humanity. For every one of those space stories that you read or biographies or movies, I always feel like when I watch The Right Stuff, I always felt like if the camera had just panned a little bit to the left, there was an equally interesting story going on with all of those families. And they touch on some of those in a little bit, but it's usually like in supporting the main story of, the guy getting in the capsule. And, but for me personally, what I wanted to know was, okay, like, but then what, wait, get that pan back over here. Like, I want to know, what did they do next? Why did they do that? Like, how did they manage that? Because it's a very unusual world to live in. And so when the opportunity came up to share my story, I felt kind of like my story was a little bit of a continuation on the narrative coming out of kind of this next. There's certainly been a couple of generations of spaceflight. You have, of course, Mercury and Gemini and Apollo, and then going into Skylab and the shuttle, and of course Soyuz, where we were, and now of course Dragon. But there's some gaps in there, but I felt like at least we can jump from the Apollo story into kind of the Soyuz Dragon era, and try to start picking up telling the story from this other perspective, because it is different. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's, I think you hit the sweet spot, because Tan and I are both content creators, and we often think about and hear stories from people who are successful in the content creation world on the internet. And oftentimes the most successful people are people who found those untold stories, the niches that have yet to be tackled. And those are the ones that sort of pave the way into a new world. And it seems like you've done that, but in like the author space, in the book writing world, where it's like, hey, this hasn't been covered. That's powerful that you're able to discover that yourself. And it made a fantastic book, so incredible job. So really quick, I wanted to address too, this is like a little interjection here. We had to coordinate. The reason why we decided to do this pre-recorded and instead of a live stream was there was a little bit of coordination that we had to do here with Stacey. And that's because she is 18 hours ahead of Tan and myself. And would you like to share where you are and why you are there?
Sure.
Might also explain a little bit of the connectivity blips here and there, if that happens. So.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yes. I'm sorry. We joke here that our internet is powered by sea turtle power, because I currently live in the Marshall Islands. For people who are, as your audience is tuned into kind of everything in the space world, the name Kwajalein Atoll will probably not be unfamiliar. It is an island in the Marshall Islands that the U.S. has held since 1944, and it's been part of the Reagan test site apparatus for a long time, but it was also part of the original SpaceX texting program, and there's a lot going on here. But my husband is now currently the garrison commander here of U.S. Army Garrison Kwajalein Atoll. So after 10 years at NASA, he's still on active status, but we decided to kind of switch back into the Army leadership side for a while. And so in just last year, we've been here 1 year. It's a 2-year assignment. We moved from Houston, which, most of the astronauts live in the Houston area, because that's where Johnson Space Center, which is the Center for Manned Spaceflight, is. So everybody is centered there. And we moved here for 2 years. So yes, our internet is dismal. So I apologize in advance to your listeners if there's some blips and delay. It is our constant vein of our existence out here. But when you consider, I just learned that our internet connection comes through a fiber optic cable 2,000 miles under the ocean from Guam, and actually comes up on our there's a beach at the far end of our tiny island, and you can actually see it, like the pipe or by cable, I guess, come out of the ocean onto the coral shelf and like connect into the island. So, you know, I guess we should be amazed it works at all. That's what I'm saying.
That's so cool.
Yeah. It's currently, for the listeners out there, it's currently 3:40 p.m. Central here. And what time is it for you, Stacey?
It is 9:40 a.m. a day ahead of you. So we're on the other side of the international date line, which makes phone calls and meetings a little bit more challenging when it comes to scheduling things. So I appreciate your flexibility.
Oh, of course.
This is cool. It's like we're recording her from the future, right?
That's right. Tomorrow's great. Tomorrow's great.
Where should I place my bets? What sports teams win?
I wish I'd be a very wealthy woman if it worked that way.
Just to ask a question about Kwajalein. You mentioned it had sort of, the U.S. has been in control of it since World War II. I did a little bit of reading on it. I found it super fascinating that it was captured by the American military at the time. Has then became a base. Now at this point, all the way up into 2024, is it required to be military personnel to be on the atoll, or is there a way for travelers like myself to show up there and see the
very good question. So our island, so the atoll is of course a series of islands, about 120 little tiny islands. Kwajalein Island, which was where I'm sitting right now, is a military base. So everybody who lives here is American or an American contractor. So there's a mixture of military and contractors. And yes, you can't, even though there are flights here, you can't just get on a plane and fly here and get off. And I will say it's beautiful here. We have unbelievable, I will be ruined forever when it comes to snorkeling and swimming. It's beautiful beaches. But it is not exactly a tourist destination in that we don't really have a hotel. We have like one store. We have no restaurants. We have no vehicles, only bicycles. And you do have to get special permission to get off the plane here because we are a closed military facility. So people have visited us. We'll have visitors, but it is a little bit of a paperwork hassle to fly here.
That's so wild. You said there are no restaurants?
Yes, that's right. Unless you count like our little food court, which I would not count that as a restaurant. I know.
Even the McDonald's?
That's what I miss the most. In that little food court, anybody who has any experience with the military will know that on any military base, there's a food court. And it always has the same, it has the same restaurants: Burger King, Hunt's Pizza, Subway. That's what we have here. That's right. And so that's about that. We have a dining facility where that's also typical of a military base. You have a dining facility, unusual here in that anybody can eat at it. And then we have a little like kind of bakery pizza place that does pizza some nights of the week. So again, it's very unusual. None of the normal rules to like life apply here. We can get packages, but it takes 3 weeks. And, it's a very much like a return to the 1950s or the 80s, depending on, your perspective. But it's great. It's certainly great. And it does feel like you are a part of history here because we still have World War II Japanese bunkers and things that are still here left over from the military operation in 1944. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, I read that there was a massive naval bombardment on the island during the war that was impressive and devastating in terms of casualties. But that's impressive to know that there's still buildings and constructs lingering today.
Yes, and what's interesting is the real legacy of that is that we still have a huge amount of unexploded ordnance in the ground here. We dropped so much ordnance that this island is so interesting because it is this perfect mix of history. The whole island is considered a historic battlefield. And yet we have built over 80 years, but 81 years this year since the original military operation. Then we've built these high-tech space sensors and all these things, that, optics and lasers and rocketry platforms here and testing platforms on top of this historic ground. And so anytime you go to create something new here, first of all, personally, we are not allowed to dig. That's one of the first rules. No digging allowed, because we regularly find unexploded ordnance. We dropped so much stuff. And so by unexploded ordnance, I mean bombs in the ground that either dropped and didn't go off, or or pieces of it maybe didn't fully go. And so you better safe than sorry. The last thing you need is to stick a shovel in the ground and get a nasty surprise. So every time you go to build a new sensor for Space Force or something that tests rocketry, the first step is they do all this clearing of the ground to make sure there isn't anything in there they need to dig up and dispose of before they build that building. So wow. It's a unique challenge out here, but a key piece of terrain geopolitically, but also space-wise, because we have so many interesting pieces of technology here that directly relate to kind of how we view space and how we track what's going on orbitally around the Earth. And so it is this funky mix of old and new, historical and like technologically advanced. It's really fascinating.
The last thing you want is your kid to come home like, Mom, look at this shell I found. You're like, that's not a shell. Put it back.
It happens. I mean, we find it's every week. We have a whole team here whose job it is to deal with unexploded ordnance, and they are busy. Wow. Very busy.
When you were talking about the food court, just going back to that, I was curious. Like, did you ever like pull the card where it's like, hey, Burger King, I'm the commander's wife, hook me up with a free burger.
Oh, I know. It's tempting, but yeah, I know. Well, here we only have about 1,200 people on the island here, so it's like living in a very small town where everybody knows everybody. Mm-hmm. So it would only take me about 30 seconds for it to get around that the commander's wife was demanding free burgers at Burger King. Like, definitely not going to do that.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh. I think I saw on Instagram you had posted some pictures about trick-or-treating on Halloween just a couple weeks ago. Did I see something about it? You had like 600 kids show up, or people?
Oh, at least. Almost 700 people. I mean, again, absolutely fascinating here. Just what a contrast from living in Houston, and just like it's an interesting mold here of American culture, but also because we are living in a foreign country. This is the Marshall Islands. We have a lot of Marshallese who work here. They don't live on the island, but they live on the neighboring island, and they come here to work, and they're friends of ours, and they're coworkers. And so a lot of them come over. They love Halloween. They've happily adopted many of our customs, and we invite them to come over and participate. And Halloween's a big one. Yeah, it was. I appreciate that they put it in a 2-hour window. So I love knowing when trick-or-treating is ending, because then you're like, good, I can turn my lights off and not worry about, teenagers ringing the doorbell at midnight. But it was a crazy 2 hours of about 700 trick-or-treaters. And that's just like the people who I gave candy to. It was probably over 1,000 when you add adults and, whatever. It was crazy, but it was super fun. And it's really been great to be here. And it was a great decision for our family to come and just try really have another type of grand adventure. Certainly everything we experienced at NASA was a grand adventure for our family, but this has been another like really unique opportunity that we wanted to make the most of, and it's been awesome.
How long does it take to adjust going from somewhere like Houston and then just being on an island? Like,
it definitely is an adjustment. Houston, like I said, all astronauts live, most American astronauts live near Johnson Space Center, and we like to clump together. Like, so my husband's a member of the 2013 class, affectionately known as the 8 balls. There were only 8 of them. And you get to know the classes that are right before you and the one that's right after you, pretty much. And a lot of us lived in the same neighborhood, even in Houston, and we could walk to each other's houses. And you really, they become like family members to you. But Houston is like crazy. It's like super, one of the top biggest cities in the country, and traffic is a nightmare, and schools are very competitive. So it's like high performance, high tempo, and everything that is NASA, right? So transitioning here to a small town, I will say, being an astronaut, people do like, and being an astronaut family in Houston, people knew that. But literally there were 2 other astronauts living on my street. So we were not the only family. And my kids were in classes with other astronaut kids. And so while it was unique, like the math teacher at parent teacher night is not like fawning all over me, because, well, the family after me is another astronaut kid, and the one, 2 after another astronaut kid. Like, she's had 10 astronaut kids in the last. So there was, even though it was still unusual, it wasn't like stop the presses, oh my gosh, I just saw an astronaut kind of situation in your day-to-day life. There were enough of us around that most people could treat you pretty normally. And honestly, the joke is like that if they're not wearing the blue flight suits, nobody even knows who they are or what they look like. It's just like faceless blue flight suit. Now here, very small community, everybody knows everybody. So I do feel like we got a little bit of practice living in the kind of like D-level celebrity world of being an astronaut, like, situational celebrities, what we usually call it. Like, people know who you are if you're in the right place at the right time, wearing the blue flight suit or wearing the NASA t-shirt. Other than that, people don't know who you are, but you are used to people maybe being curious about your life and wanting to know what's going on and maybe paying a little more attention to you. Then when we got here, well, everybody's very curious about you because you're new, the commander's family. I showed up here with, I have 4 kids. My son is already in college, but I brought here my 3 teenage girls. So anytime you show up anywhere with 3 teenage girls, you're going to make a big splash in a small community. So we did feel like there's a lot of eyeballs on what we do. And we were used to that. So that wasn't like a pressure. I would just say it makes you be the best version of yourself, honestly, because the people are watching. So, you can't afford to be like rude to somebody or cut in line at Burger King, right? Like that's good. Like I shouldn't be doing those things anyway. But knowing that people are watching does make you like, it's just like one more check on yourself to be like, okay, am I being my best version of myself? Am I representing what I want to represent when I step outside the door or even when people come in my house? So yeah, a little bit of an adjustment, but not too crazy. It wasn't too crazy. The adjustments were more like, what do you mean it's going to take me 3 weeks to get an Amazon Prime package, or there's no place to like, when you just like, I don't not feel like cooking tonight. Like, oh crap, there's nowhere to go. Like, what am I going to do? There's these little lifestyle adjustments that some good, some bad, but you just accept it as part of the adventure.
I would love to talk some more about your relationship with Drew and his story and being in space. You obviously chronicle that heavily in your book, and that's an amazing and compared to the scope of the current world population, you're one of a select small slice of humanity that can say that you're an astronaut family, and your family has someone who has been to space or is going to space or training for space. Can you sort of tell a little bit about the story of having that journey begin? How you mentioned Drew was in the 2013 class. NASA astronauts, joining that family of astronauts, and then the training, and then leading into the journey of Drew's mission in 2019. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I mean, so the astronaut selection process is, of course, very long, and anybody can Google it and learn more about it. It's very long, very arduous, and the chances, of course, are very low. I mean, top question that myself and my husband get asked all the time is somebody will say, my kid or my niece or my cousin or my husband wants to be an astronaut. Like, what should they do? And, they want to know how to do it. And the number one piece of advice we always give is find a career that you love, so that when you apply and you don't get it, you still are doing something you love. Don't craft this life thinking I will only be happy if it results with me, getting to wear the blue flight suit, because the likelihood is you will not, right? Like, you won't. And so I would get, like, even from the spouse side, every time that there's a window, there's currently a window right now to select a new class. I get messages from people who are like eternal optimists, I guess is the way I should view it. And they're like, my spouse has applied. So what everything I need to know to be a successful astronaut spouse? And I'm like, well, you are getting way ahead of yourself. Like, that's very, like, I props to your proactive nature, but like the likelihood of that happening is very small, right? So when my husband told me he wanted to apply, I was like, what are you even talking about? Because I always knew he was like a space buff, but like who isn't, I mean, I didn't realize that his interest was more than anybody else's, honestly. And we were all in, we are all in to being an Army family. And we were operating mostly in the special operations community, which requires a very high level of secrecy, and it's a lifestyle, right? And if you're not all in, it can be very hard. And so we were all in. And so for him to come home one day and be like, hey, I want to apply to this astronaut program. And I was like, what are you even talking about? Like, shuttle is ending. Shuttle hadn't yet ended, was everybody in the world knew it was about to in the next year or two, his last few flights. Like, what are you even talking about? Like, is there even a space program? Yeah, like, what are you even talking about? And honestly, we were supposed to be moving to Germany, which we were super stoked about. Like, and so I was a little annoyed because I was like, wait a minute, man. Like, we have this plan. I'm going to Germany. I'm going to buy lederhosen. I'm going to be eating pretzels and like going to Christmas markets. And like, I have like, this is going to be awesome. And now you're telling me like, we go to Houston instead. Like, what are you like? I'm sorry. Those are not equal. And he was like, but every step, he's like, don't worry. Like, it's not going to happen. The likelihood is so small. It's never going to happen. At the time, they had never selected an Army physician before. Mm-hmm. And so he was like, it's just, it's not going to happen, but I want to say that I applied. And the joke was that, no matter what, you'll always be able to say you were a NASA applicant. And at the time, now it's digital, but at the time, when you applied to become an astronaut, you would get, and you got denied, you would get a letter in the mail that said like, thank you for applying, but like, thanks, but no thanks. And people will frame those and put it on their wall and be like, like, isn't this so funny? That's the year I applied to be an astronaut. Now it's all digital, so they don't do that anymore. But that was the joke. Like, okay, you're going to apply and you're not going to make it, and we'll frame the rejection letter and move on. Yeah. Except he kept making every cut. And I'm like, what is happening right now? Like, Germany is slipping out of my fingers. Yep. And then when you get down to that final pool of people, and this has been a very interesting, the process of going through a high like caliber level selection process like that is so interesting. We learned so much about ourselves and about that process that we've applied to other aspects of our lives, which is like, for so many things, when you get down to the final pool of people, and this is true for astronaut selection as it is true like for colleges, when we were talking to our kids about what college to go to, in the end, that pool of people, everyone in that pool is fully capable of doing the job. And so you don't have to prove you're capable anymore. You have the street creds, you have everything you need to do, you have the degrees, you have the experience. And now it's just, they're picking personalities, right? They're picking people who work together, how many men, how many women, what are the pieces that make a good team? And that has been a really interesting, I think, life lesson for me as I, when I apply for things or when I talk to people about applying for things, like there's a point in every process where you don't have to prove you're capable anymore. It's now now they're picking, do I want to spend time with you? And that's interesting too, because another running joke in the astronaut corps was that every class is stupider than the class that came before it, because that's not really true. But the truth is that during shuttle, when we were running 2-week-long missions, you needed experts that were like so focused on you're an expert in this one little thing, because they were building the flipping space station, right? They were doing these things. And well, as the space station got built out and the spacecraft become more autonomous, and really you're not really piloting, you're really just kind of a passenger and someone else is controlling it somewhere else. What we need now, what makes the most successful astronauts, is the same thing that makes the most successful teammates, spouses, friends, neighbors, and that's extremely high emotional IQ. Are you the kind of person who I'm willing to get locked in a very small space for 6 months to 2 years with? And we always joke, you can teach a monkey to do anything, but you can't teach them not to be a jerk. Right. And so it's one thing if you're doing you could live for 2 weeks with a jerk on the space station when they were putting things together, and you only had to do 2 weeks. So you don't like that guy, whatever. Totally different scenario when you're talking about going to Mars, right? Or doing a lunar flyby, or just, 6 months to 12 months on the space station. All of a sudden that guy's bad attitude or his selfishness or his whatever becomes a real problem. So the way to make yourself most attractive, once you meet those qualification standards, then you don't have to prove you're smart enough anymore. Now, to be successful in life, you need to prove that you are a good buddy, you're a good teammate. And Drew's an extremely good teammate. And that's one of the things that he's learned through the Army, and that we work on a lot, in our marriage, how do you be a good teammate? And that's being very self-aware and also aware of how you interface with others and reading social cues and being a good communicator and a good listener and stuff. And so anyway, that was a little bit of a digression, but that's when we finally got selected, when he came to me one day, he literally called, I talk about this in the intro. I was at the grocery store. It was a random weekday, some random time, where else would I be? I was I had 4 small kids. And of course I'm at the grocery store, and he's like, "Where are you?" And I'm "I'm at the grocery store." Where else would I be? And he's like, "Are you coming home soon?" And I was like, "Why you ask me this?" It was it's 9 a.m. or something. And he's like, "I just need you to get home as soon as possible." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." Okay. So I pull into the garage and he's waiting for me. And he's like, "I have bad news. We're not going to Germany." And I was like, blink, blink. And then understanding is I got the phone call, and so the final group gets a phone call. So you yes or no. And so, and usually it's cutting down from about 50 or so down to, and of course this changes every time, but in his case it was about 50 people, and then they selected 8. And so, but every one of those people gets a yes or no phone call. And so he was like, "I got the phone call. We're moving to Houston." And I was like, "Well, crap." So here we go. And literally overnight, yes, it was excitement, but also with any major life change where you're "Oh my gosh, I had this plan. I've put a lot of effort into this plan. And now I have to just throw it all away and start over. And I don't know anything about school districts or buying a house or I don't know anything about this area." And so all of a sudden you're scrambling. So I think we got the call in June, his first day of showing up at work at Johnson Space Center was August 1st or something like that. And so it was this whirlwind of undoing everything for our old life, creating all the things you got to do quick. We got to drive, we got to buy a house, we got to figure out schools, we got to all the things, change where the Packers are sending our stuff, and move down there and start new. And honestly, again, universal for any move. We landed, house was full of boxes, chaos, getting school year started, like the week that school started, one of our cats disappeared that we had just stinking dragged all the way across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And then it disappears. So I've got sad kids and stress of a new, and then, but every day Drew went off to his new awesome job. And there's tension in that transition of like, we just upended our lives to do this new thing and it will be awesome, but there's a uncomfortable transition there. And that's true for astronaut families as much as it's true for anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's kind of interesting about the astronaut family lifestyle is that 80% of it is totally normal, like everybody else's. But then we just have this 10 to 20% that is like so weird and unusual and unique. But because most of what most people only see is that 20%, they think that we're like floating around the house in spacesuits or something like that. When really I'm like, nope, like just taking the trash out, like, just emptying the dishwasher.
Yeah, but is it floating trash?
Yeah. Is it floating trash? Is it put in special bags and pushed out the window? Yeah. Right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You had mentioned, it escaped me. Sorry. I was too focused on floating garbage cans and I lost the picture and I thought I had something I totally wanted to bring up. Maybe it'll come back to me.
Okay.
So yeah, here it is. So you mentioned the all-in attitude of military families and also that translating to astronaut families as well. I know that is an incredibly challenging thing to have two career-oriented parents or just two people in a couple who need to sort of negotiate time spent and brain space, shared, heart and feelings around what direction do we go with our lives? How do we share that in, two lives in one? What was that like committing to that? Because I can imagine that certainly was no walk in the park to just be like, oh yeah, sure, let's just upend our life and move all about or deal with these stresses. It's not like, hey, I just took a job on the other side of town. What's that like choosing the all-in mentality?
Yeah, that's true. And I think, it is what makes it unique on the space side is that there is that public side of it, right? So it's like you have to be all in, but there's also in being all in, you are opening yourself up to a public side, not all the time, but there will be times when you need to perform, right? You need to show up. People are going to be looking at you and what are you wearing? And what are you saying? And are your kids behaving? And, are you what people expect an astronaut family or spouse to look like? And that there is a kind of a pressure there. I mean, anytime you have two people who are in a relationship and one or more of them has a job that is demanding, that's a very hard conversation, right? Like at some point, it's very hard for both people's careers and lives to be prioritized because if everything's prioritized, nothing's prioritized, right? Like, So now, not to say that we don't have friends who have successfully navigated dual military or even, dual NASA relationships. There are some, but I think they would be the first to tell you it was not easy because it meant difficult conversations about whose career at that time took priority,
right.
Because at some point there are times where somebody's career has to be the priority. So for us, the world we were living on the military side, I've had the ability, luckily, I took some time off when my kids were younger, and now I transitioned back into the workforce when my kids got older, and I've been able to find work that was like remote and flexible, which can be hard to do. And I feel really blessed that I've been able to do that. But it is very hard because these high stress jobs, the military, NASA, first responders, right? Like in order to do your job well, you need to feel that you are supported at home, I think. And there's also a pressure, I think, especially for astronaut spouses, like if I'm sending my husband into space, he's going to be doing dangerous work. Same for the military. I want him to be able to focus on what he's doing because it's very dangerous. And if he screws it up, we got problems.
Yeah.
And so I don't want him worrying about me or how I'm handling things at home. I want him to just be able to be like, she's got this. Well, in order to get to that point, there's a pressure on me to make sure I do got this.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and then sometimes it means you don't share some of the things that are going on because you don't want to stress them out unnecessarily. And so even when Drew was in orbit, like, am I gonna get on the phone and be like, and then this, and then this, and then this, like in the same way that I would if he was home? Like, no, because I don't want him stressed about it, because I know the next day he's got to get up and he's got to perform a spacewalk in the flipping vacuum of space, and I don't want him worrying about whether our kid is failing math. I want him focused on, is your tether attached to the outside of the station properly? And so, so that's a burden that falls, that's one of those like intangible, invisible burdens that falls on the spouse, because you just want to make sure that you're clearing out all the extra noise so they can focus on what's going to keep them safe and bring them home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's. I think it's impressive to establish that cohesiveness between, two partners in a marriage, and to find that mojo and be like okay with dealing with the ebb and flow of energy, and being able to read each other, communicate well, and course correct when you need to. So props to you for continuing to navigate that. And I'm sure there's been times where you guys have felt like, hey, yeah, that was easier than we thought, or that was more challenging than we thought. But yeah, no less simple of a concept to get right. So when Drew ended up launching, you guys had to, after you trained and got prepared to go, he got assigned to a mission. You guys had to travel overseas to witness him launch. Can you tell us the story about where you went and what it was like watching him lift off of planet Earth?
Yeah. So Drew launched in July of 2019. And so most people will recognize that was the calm before the COVID storm, right? So we were on one of the few families that really has one of the last families to be able to experience what it was like to be assigned to Soyuz, which was really, really amazing. So, a little history that I'm sure your listeners are aware of. When shuttle ended, there was a period of time there of about 10 years where shuttle was over and SpaceX Dragon was not yet launching from Florida. So the only vehicle to get to and from the International Space Station was Russian Soyuz rockets. And Soyuz is it's more than the name of the rocket. It is like a whole culture. Soyuz is incredible. While we went and tried all different kinds of vehicles over the years, the Russians stuck with what worked. And so Soyuz it looks almost identical to the way it did in 1963. They've been made some upgrades, of course, but they love their traditions and they love kind of that culture, and it works. And so they stick with it. And so it was awesome. So part of that, so during the train up after assignment, the crew trains considerably on that vehicle. So Drew did a lot of time in Russia, in Star City, Russia, which is where that's the cosmonaut training base, just outside of Moscow. And then we did have an opportunity to visit him go and visit. And that was cool. Just the summer, even before he launched, to spend several weeks in Russia, which was, as a kid who grew up in the Cold War, that was like walking on the grounds of the Kremlin, and it's incredible. You just like, it's so surreal to kind of be there. And then in the summer of 2019, so Drew, the crew leaves ahead of the families, but then we flew to Moscow, did several days in Star City and doing some things in Moscow. And then Soyuz launches from Kazakhstan. So we have to fly, Kazakhstan's former Soviet republic. And the Soviets built this space base out of nothing. I mean, it's incredible. And they built it, at the time, super secret program. So they literally found like this big piece of flat, high desert out there. And they built this city out of nothing. And so you fly from Moscow to Kazakhstan, and it's again a super fascinating combination of this high-tech space base, but then you look over to your left and there are wild camels just like roaming around, you know.
So cool.
Yeah, so cool. So and then there's all this, you know, Soviet iconography, murals, and because again they haven't changed it, so even though it's in Kazakhstan, it's still Russian controlled, so they kind of own that property and run that. And so it's really unique experience, and we did all of the traditions that Soviet and now these joint international crews have been doing for decades, and that involves a lot of vodka, a lot of toasting, a lot of ceremonies, dinners, but it's really cool because they just have all these traditions, and you just go with it. Like when they come out this door, they're always going to play that same song, and you're like, I don't know this song, but every cosmonaut knows this song. It's a Russian rock song, and I don't speak Russian, but it's cool. Like I can jam to it. So, you know, it's always going to be the same process to get to it. And so you feel like you're a part of history because you are following in the same footsteps as every other family and every other crew has since the 1960s. Like they still follow a lot of the same traditions that Yuri Gagarin did. That's how, you know, he is like their cultural icon for spaceflight. So they're going to do everything he did. And his widow still lives in Star City, Russia, in their same apartment. I mean, like, it's incredible.
God.
It's a really cool, it was an incredible experience. Yeah. So we got to bring a few guests with us. They had to pay their own way, but we got so many spots, and they got to join us there. It is the complete opposite experience of what a Florida space launch looks like. You know, Florida is so like colorful and bright and sunny and like, you know, big countdown clocks and like just very American. You know, it's great.
Yep.
You know, we're out there in this field. We're only about a mile from the launch pad, which is unreal when you like, I mean, like when you see how far we are, if you go to Florida, you are, you know, like way much farther than that away from the launch pad. And then, you know, there's no countdown clock. There's nobody like, okay, here we go. There's no music. There's no whatever. It's just like standing in the dark and, you know, everybody looking at their watches, knowing it's going to happen right at this time. And what's cool is that, you know, when the rocket launches, it chases the space station, you know, so it's going to launch and it's going to match that orbit, right, for several rounds and slowly catch up. So we saw the space station pass overhead, and then we knew like, all right, here we go. Like, you know, there's the target. And then, you know, shortly after that, the rocket takes off, and we know that now it's going to be chasing that. So very, very surreal it's one thing to see a rocket launch. It's another to know that you know the people in the capsule. And it's almost, but because you can't see them, like with your naked eye there, it almost feels fake. You know, I hate to say that because that'll get the conspiracy theorists all spun up, but it's not fake. But you know what I'm saying? It feels like, is this really happening? Like, is he really in there? And is like, just absolutely surreal. So we watch it launch, and then there's a number of other things that you do when you're over there that have always been done. You're always going to go to this theater, and you're going to watch them come in through the hatch, and you're going to talk to them on this phone, and then you're going to fly back to Moscow, and you're going to have a day or two, and then you're going to fly back home, and then life just continues on. And that's when it gets weird because it's like you're living life, but this person that you like literally a month ago was emptying the dishwasher is now in space. And now like they've upped even in just the last like 5 years since Drew was on, like technology has advanced already. And now you can video call kind of on demand. But when Drew was on station, we got one video call a week, had to be scheduled. There's a whole thing. So it's much better now. But, you know, we'd video call with him, and there he is like floating and like floating candy into his mouth and showing us pictures out the window. And like, it's mind bending because you're like, am I really seeing this? I mean, sometimes you'd go out at night. I'm sure you guys talk about on here on the podcast, like tracking the ISS going overhead. And, it's not always like, I think I saw it happen maybe in Drew's 9 months on, maybe 4 times where it was dark enough, not cloudy, and it was like high enough that you could see it. And standing outside my house, and you're watching this light pass overhead, and it just looks like this bright light, but you think to yourself, and I knew the time difference because the space station operates on Greenwich Mean Time. So I knew that if I'm watching him pass over at like, I don't know, 8 p.m. or whatever, he's asleep. And so he's in his sleeping bag strapped to the wall so he doesn't float away. and so to watch this beam of like this little light and be like my husband is in that light dot, like in a sleeping bag strapped to a wall. So he won't float away, like all cozied up. Like, it's weird. Your brain has a hard time. It's like trying to ponder infinity. You're like, wow, like this world is wild. I mean, like, this is weird.
Yeah. I think just a few short episodes ago here on our show, somebody brought up the space station, and one of our friends in the chat said, "Don't bring up the ISS because you won't be able to shut Nick up." It's by far my number one favorite thing to focus on and learn about in the entirety of whatever space is. I just love the ISS so much. I mean, I've got the Lego right up here on my computer.
Here we go.
Nice.
And I've very unashamedly mentioned that I've kept a log of space station sightings since 2012 when I first learned how to kind of track it and watch it. And at this point, I'm gonna pull it up here on my computer. I've seen it 161 times.
Pretty good.
And just like excited. I'm curious to see if I've seen it when Drew was up there.
Dude, you might have a photo.
That's very possible.
How crazy would that be?
That's very possible. So he was up there. Was it July 2019?
July of 19, all the way through. Came back in April of 20, middle of COVID.
Okay,
good times.
So I have 7 sightings in that period, and I keep notes. So let's see.
Dude, that would be so insane.
I see a couple of failures of clear captures, but I did attempt photography during that time. I'll look a little deeper a little bit later and see if I have any like different photos. But
that's cool.
I tried to, I was just curious about that because that was it's just one of those things I get so excited about. So I know the vibe of seeing this little white dot, but also trying to fathom in your head that there's people on that. And whenever I've shared that experience with friends who know nothing about space, I'm like, come outside really quick, ditch the party, and come look at this, do this really nerdy thing with me, please. They're like, oh, it's like groans and grumbles until they see it.
Yes.
And then I explain that not only is that thing traveling 17,500 miles per hour, it has 6 people on it or 9 people on it or whatever at the time. And then they're like, you're joking, right? And I'm like, no. And these are the names of the people who are on there right now. And this is where they're from. This person's from Russia. This person's from Japan. This person's from America. And it just gives this whole extra layer. But I have yet to know somebody personally who, so I can only imagine the feeling that you've had watching your husband on that little light in the sky. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is very surreal. It just, again, it's like your brain just can't fathom. And first of all, you see that light and like, hey, that light, it looks like just like a star, is actually the size of a football field. So first of all, like that doesn't make sense to our brain. But then that there's people on it sleeping, usually when you see it at night, like, so like you almost, your brain is like, I don't know if I believe that, like, because it's just so incredible. Yeah.
To kind of go back to what Nick was saying about the ISS, in the astronomy space, whenever I'm out with my club or with other people, anytime the ISS shows up, it is an immediate, everyone stop what you're doing, look. There will be some guy in the background 20 feet away or some guy right next to you that will just yell, hey guys, look towards the north, we have an ISS, and everyone kind of stops and stops what they're doing to look at it. And this, Nick, like we were saying, the same conversations always arise. Like, oh, did you guys know that there's people in here? And it's always fascinating. I've always wondered what it would be like to be up there, but to wonder, to have someone that someone
Right.
so close to you. I don't know. I think for me, I would probably get emotional. Did that ever happen? Where you
Yeah,
just
for sure. Yeah, I mean, because it is like when you don't see something like that, it almost feels like someone's on a on a trip. It's kind of like, and then you see them on a screen, and if it's like a tight enough shot where you only like see their face, you're like, okay, like you could be anywhere. It's the same you. But then when you see this dot and they're on there, and all of a sudden the distance just feels like, oh my gosh. And then I guess the reality of like, my gosh, the isolation of that, realizing like, my gosh, you're on this tiny dot and it's going so fast. And just like you said, over 17,000 miles an hour. And like, so the danger of that, if you know any of the science, which most astronaut families do, because that's the world we live in, like it can be overwhelming and then become emotional as you're like, oh my gosh, like it's crazy to think that you're living on this thing that's going so fast and it's so far away and it's going all the way around the earth. And what if something happens? What if both on both sides, like you realize when you see that, it brings home the reality of what you've read on all the papers, which is like, if something happens at home, they're not coming back, right? Like they're not sending them home early to help you manage this problem. Like, and when you see that star, what looks like a star orbiting the Earth, you're like, oh yeah, like that all of a sudden it really like makes it real. Like I'm still connected to him, but there is like, you feel the disconnection because you feel that distance and how dramatically different your lives are. And it is weird because you're living these like parallel lives, and then you're connecting every so often and telling each other what's going on, but your lives are so different for that time that it's super weird. It can be, it's this, so like, how do you even begin to explain all the things that he's doing and seeing? And like I said, how do I tell him what's going on down here without making him worry about things or just sounding really boring? Like, okay, like, I mean, what did I do today? Like nothing compared to what you were doing, So like, yeah. And that's where it's really helpful to have people who, like other spouses, they're not all, there's not that many astronauts. Not all astronauts are married. And then, crews are very small. Like I would say that was a big difference between the stresses of like a military deployment, where very similar stresses in terms of danger and time away and stuff. But every time he would deploy, you're with usually dozens, if not hundreds of other spouses whose spouses are doing the same dangerous things that you are. So you could call up any number of people and be like, oh my gosh, like, what do you think about this? Or how are you dealing with this? Or, help me out. Or I just need to talk to somebody about this experience. And there were plenty of options. One of the biggest stressors, I think, that most people don't think about is that, Drew was in a crew of 3, and one was Russian, one was Italian, and then there's him. And then he got up there and the crew changes over. And so I'm really good friends with the spouses of the other crewmates who were up there and other classmates and stuff. But like, it's a very small pool of people to pull from, because even in, so we do, the spouses do tend to we try to stay in contact as much as possible and support each other, because nobody understands your situation like a fellow spouse and family member. But even in that, like, if I wanted to talk to somebody about the launch experience, well, who am I going to talk to, right? Like, I'm not really talking to the spouses of the Italian or the Russian crewmates. So it was like, so in that way is a little isolating there. That was a little bit different. And it just adds another layer of like, just a little bit of stress that's associated with that when you don't have a ton of people who can be like, oh yeah, I'm in it with you, like right now,
The concept of international cooperation is one of my favorite parts of the space program in general. I mean, hence why I'm such a big fan of the ISS itself, because it just represents this unity and this cooperative attitude and spirit between nations. Obviously, Drew being a part of a mission where he's the only American, even though it's three, it's extremely diverse. Everyone's from a different country.
Yeah.
There's the obvious geopolitical tensions between certain nations, both presently and historically.
Yeah.
And that I'm sure, like, what was that like knowing, hey, we're going to be cooperating with, Russian space programs and I need to travel there and you're going to be traveling there, or something might change with the world. Is that going to be, how's that going to affect us? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a reality, right? I mean, whenever you're dealing with multi-nation operations, things kind of like, you may have a great relationship. And I would say the space programs from all the different countries, it's not just US and Russia. You've got European Space Agency, you've got Japanese Space Agency. Now the Emiratis have started their own agency. India is launching their own program. Like, all these countries are getting involved. And so there's a lot of like voices that are speaking into that. Now, in general, those space programs get along well, and they communicate well, and they have a shared mission of keeping everybody safe and all that kind of stuff. But you have, it would be naive to think that geopolitically, like that wouldn't necessarily affect what's going on, right? And sometimes that affects families in terms of like, when we would go to Russia to visit, like, they have to grant your visa, right? Are they going to grant that visa? Are they going to, are you going to get hassled when you get there? You don't know, right? So it is something you have to be aware of. Now, every interaction I had with Russian crew, great guys, and wonderful women, and just like, no problem at all. Just like the cosmonaut astronaut connection across all the countries has always been really good. The tension is at a much higher level than, within the astronaut corps. But yeah, it would be naive as an American to think I'm going to go to travel in Russia and that that it's going to go smoothly, right? Like, there's going to be issues, right? Because our countries are not always friendly with each other. And so you just have to sometimes take that in consideration, or just cultural differences and stuff. But I'm so glad, like, even though, everybody dreams of launching from like American soil and having the big like American launch, which is great, there was something really special about doing a Soyuz launch and getting to experience everything that is a Russian Soyuz launch. Now, after COVID, COVID changed a lot of things. Not only did it change the ability to travel to other countries, and a lot of families, there were several crews that launched during that COVID time, and families were not allowed to travel, and they unfortunately didn't get to experience that. And I felt that's sad. Like, it was such a great experience. I'm sorry they didn't get to do that. And then on kind of the heels of COVID, all of a sudden we started launching Dragon. And so that changed the dynamics too, because now you've got an American vehicle, and now we're swapping seats. And so that changed the experience too. So really, I think there was only 1 or 2 launches after Drew's where families got to have the same full experience that we did. So I just feel really blessed that we got to really experience it like in its full entirety, the way it's kind of supposed to be before the world changed. And it's just not the same anymore. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. It's, you guys kind of entered that realm. It's such a unique point in history, unlike any other time. And I bet that sort of does feel special, right? Where, you didn't just get the same experience that everyone else had in the space program's history. You kind of get this unique slice of it, and it's still ongoing, of course. But
right.
Did that feel special?
Yeah, it felt really special. I felt really lucky to be there and to experience it all. And like I said, it wasn't like any better than anybody else's experience. Like the Dragon launches from Florida, amazing. Like, I felt lucky to have that unique experience. And yeah, it was really a special experience for me. And I think, these experiences change your family's life. Like my son, who's in college, is studying Russian. And I think a big part of that is because he got to take 2 trips to Russia. And we would never have had that experience. But he had that in those formative years and really kind of got interested, even in just like, who gets to ride the Moscow subway and like read the signs and see the things that normally like you would only see in a textbook. I will never take for granted the fact that we had that opportunity. And it was really like, it was cool in the moment, but it even had lasting implications for our family, like forever. It was really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have. I didn't leave the United States for the first time. Last year was the very first time ever. I've never traveled overseas technically, but that was one of the things that I was like, man, like your kids have had this beautiful opportunity that I never had. That's like to see such amazing places and to experience cultures that are so different. And you're already seeing the implications and the positive development that's come from that, and like. I'm like, wow, that's such a cool thing. So I'm like really glad you guys were able to facilitate that and make that work for your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's surface here for just a quick second. We're loving where this is going, but I do want to take a moment to just have a little bit of fun that in a different way.
Okay.
So for those of you who've been on the show before, you know what we like to do. We like to do a little bit of a game, which we call light speed.
I'm ready.
Yeah. This is how light speed works. So this is a sort of a this or that game. And what Tan and I are going to do, Stacey, is we're going to pose some fun this or that statements for you. So for example, we might say Pepsi or Coke, to which you might reply
Coke.
Perfect. And so yeah, great. So you'd try to answer the questions as quickly as you are able to. If you don't know either of them or what we're talking about, just pick one of the things we said, and that's okay. We'll just keep moving. So we'll just go through a rapid fire session here, and then we'll go back to the conversation. So Tan, do you want to kick us off with some light speed, this or that?
Yeah, sure. All right, first one. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Pizza or burgers?
Pizza.
Beach or mountains?
Beach.
Laptop or desktop?
Ooh, I like a desktop. I know.
No, that's cool. That's good.
Cooking at home or dining out?
Dining out, because I can't right now.
I think I know the answer to this, but Atlantic or Pacific?
Oh, well, it's Pacific, yeah.
Launch day nerves or countdown excitement?
Oh, nerves.
Ooh. Yeah. Kennedy Space Center or Baikonur Cosmodrome?
I mean, better visitor center is Kennedy. Kennedy has the best visitor center.
Yes, it does. I had it on the ropes there for a second.
Living in the world without music or without movies?
Oh gosh, I guess I think I'd have to take music, but that's a close one. I do love a good movie.
Space travel or time travel?
Oh, personally, I'd probably prefer time travel.
Okay. Don't tell Drew.
Don't tell Drew.
Let's see. A long phone call or a short video chat from space?
Oh, video chat for sure. Done both. Go with the video chat all day, every day.
All right. Sci-fi genre or fantasy genre?
Oh, fantasy. Don't tell my son. He's all sci-fi.
Okay. Yeah. A lot of secrets happening in the Morgan
yeah,
household.
Exactly.
Yeah,
We're spilling it all.
How about your favorite space movie?
Oh, gosh. Oh gosh, this is terrible. I should have like 10 right on the tip of my tongue, right? This is terrible. I'm failing. I do like Apollo 13 because that's the one that like is the classic for me. So I'll go with that. I'll stick with Fall 30.
Urban or rural lifestyles?
Rural.
Nice.
Let's see. The sun or the moon?
Moon, I think.
Okay.
Space shuttle or International Space Station?
Oh, well, we got to go ISS. Come on.
Yeah, right.
Easy.
This is a traditional one. Dark meat or white meat?
I like light meat. I do.
Okay.
Oh no.
She might be the first one.
Yeah, she is the first one. Oh my gosh, we have a running gag here from past episodes doing this game, and it's kind of now become a staple to ask that question. And I love it. I think you are the first person to say light meat. So yeah, well done. Oh my goodness, Jupiter or Saturn?
Oh, I think I'm going to go with Saturn because I've seen it a couple times through telescopes, and it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, always is.
And this is my last one for me. Would you rather be stuck in space or in the ocean?
I'm going to go with space because, there's a lot, like, they have internet there.
That's fair.
Yep. All right, and here's the final one of the game. We're going to ask you, watch Drew go on another space flight or go with Drew on his next space flight?
I think I'd prefer to watch. Listen, all kudos to them. But there's not a single part of me that's like, I think I would also like to do that. Like, there's a support crew and then there's launch crew, and I'm in the support field.
From afar. Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
no stowing away in the pressurized cargo section of the next spacecraft.
No.
Good question.
Oh, awesome. Well, thanks for entertaining us here on this ridiculous segment of our show. We'll go back to the sane portion of it.
That was good. That was very good. And the light and dark meat, it's almost Thanksgiving, so that feels like very relevant to the current conversation. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it works out. Oh man.
That was good.
I'm going to take a deep breath and get a drink of water real quick. For those of you guys who have been still listening in on the show tonight or whenever you're replaying the episode, we're glad you're sticking with us here. We're speaking with Stacey Morgan, who is the author of The Astronaut's Wife. She's married to astronaut Drew Morgan, and we're continuing to listen to her story about what life is like living with an astronaut who's in space and living the military life and everything in between those things. So thanks for tuning in to the Galactic Window. It's been a great time.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. Earlier, you were in the book. You talk about coping with fear and uncertainty, and I think a lot of us, even me, still, sometimes I'm still trying to figure out how to navigate with that in my life, but. For you, can you share just a little bit of how you found peace amidst just all the fear and uncertainty?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think I talk about it in chapter 1, and the reason I put it in chapter 1 was because it's kind of like a foundational principle, I think, that carries through the whole book, because the launch, it was interesting. Leading up to the launch, everybody wants to ask you about it. How are you feeling? And people are very polite. They don't want to say what they're really thinking, but really they're all like, what if the rocket explodes? Right? That's what they really want to ask you is like, are you afraid the rocket is going to explode? And the answer is like, of course I'm afraid the rocket's going to explode. But when you're standing out there, like for me, standing out there in this dark field and like you're waiting for this countdown and you just feel very like, oh my gosh, this thing is going to happen in 10 seconds. So that like the most dangerous times in general of spaceflight, launch, landing, and spacewalking. And so here, so now this thing is going to happen that is probably, of the three, probably the riskiest in terms of like historically when the most fatalities have happened, right? So launching and not only like, so most of the time you have scary things happen, or you fear scary things happening that like will be unexpected, right? A car crash, whatever. But it's unusual to know and actually have a countdown to this like super scary experience in your life. And not only that, but know that people are watching you as you experience this very scary thing. So like, I don't get to just experience it alone. If something bad happens or something good, like no matter what happens, people are going to be looking at me and to see how is she responding. I've got kids with me who are immediately going to be looking to me as to how to respond. And so it's like a scary experience with literally a countdown to it. And then all this other pressures going with that fear. And I think it forced me to face fear in a new way because I knew it was coming. And so you have to ask yourself like, all right, what if this rocket explodes? Like you actually have to ask yourself the hard question. Like, what if this rocket explodes? What happens next? Because life, like all these eyes are going to look at you and then life's going to go on, right? In the next hour, the next day, the next year, what are you going to do? And I think what makes fear so scary is our brain like just goes off and starts imagining like the absolute, like, well, your life will be over. You know, if that rocket explodes, your life will be over. Well, the reality is your life won't be over. You will have to continue living your life. What will you do? And so it forced me to face that fear in a way that I think most of us don't normally face our fears because they just feel like nebulous, kind of like vague. I don't know. I just want to avoid it. It just seems scary. But I had to think about it because I have kids I have to think about. I have people who are looking at me. I will have to, no matter what happens, get on a bus and go back to a hotel and then get on a plane and fly back to Moscow and then get on another plane and fly back to the United States. And oh, by the way, it's live streamed on the internet. So like the world will know about it. I can't just like deal with it privately. Right. Like, so, and that's when I think I learned that sometimes like you have to let yourself think through, okay, what if that happens? And then in doing that, you realize often that the worst case scenario is like maybe not as bad as your imagination makes it out to be. Now, certainly that rocket had exploded. That would be terrible, right? Like it would be terrible. Our life would be changed forever. But the reality is I would still wake up the next morning and have to go on and do life and be a mom and a sister and a daughter and, all these things, right? Like, and that it can be scary either way. Like I talk about it in the book, like, even if it goes well, like what happens next? I don't know. Like what is this going to be like? I don't know. I've never done this before. And that's scary. So not being afraid, I think, to face, instead of avoiding the fear, like this feels scary. I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to think about the next steps, to instead being like, actually, I'm just going to take a moment and actually ask myself the question. If that worst thing happened, what would I do next? And somehow that helps. It dissipates the imaginary worst case scenarios that we bring into the situation. So I've used that in a lot of different experiences since then. That was obviously the most dramatic because there was literally a countdown to that moment. But, when my husband was like, when he called me from space and was like, I think we should consider putting my name into the hat to command this tiny little island in the middle of the Pacific and like upending our whole life, everything we've known for 10 years and all these things that people spend their lives trying to create this life that we are currently living, and uprooting that and going somewhere else and starting over. That was that was a terrifying idea. Only because your subconscious is like, but what about this? What if your kids don't adjust? What if you don't make friends? What if you hate it there? What if your career struggles? Like all these what ifs. And I think because of the launch experience, I learned like, all right, let me just take a moment and be like, okay, what's the worst that could happen? We move there and we hate it. Well, then what, right? We move there and the kids are unhappy. Okay, well, then what? We move there and my career stumbles. Okay, well, then what? And, you know, the end, like the narrative wasn't nearly as scary as what my imagination had like brought up to it, you know. But that's the whole, I mean, and that's where hope comes into it too. Like, you can't just logic your way out of not being afraid anymore. You have to like, there is something, you know, if you're a religious person, you know, there's a faith element there. If you're not a religious person, you can attribute it to the magic of the universe, whatever you want, right? But like at some point there's something bigger than you, right? And like whatever you want to say that bigger thing is, you know, for me, it's my faith to be like, I have to trust at the end of the day, I'm not going to be able to logic myself out of not being afraid anymore. Scary things are going to happen all the time. But what I can do is believe that no matter what, it will be okay in the end. It may not be okay tomorrow. Like if that rocket exploded, my kids are still going to need therapy. It's going to be a long road. We're going to be grieving, but at the end of the day, we'll be okay. And that's a lesson that a friend taught me when our husbands were deploying a lot and we were going to a lot of funerals.
Yeah.
And it was very scary. And none of us, we were all kind of avoidant of talking about it. We didn't like to watch the news. We just didn't want to face that scariness, that scary possibility. And that was not the right approach. She was the first person I ever saw in real life, like turn towards a fear and be like, I'm going to look you in the eye and I'm going to actually ask some hard questions. And so she taught me that. And so when it came to the launch, like, all right, like, be very easy to just melt into a puddle and be afraid, but I don't have that luxury. I have to, I got to face this. So, yeah.
I think one of the best stories or the vignettes that you include in your book, I believe is with your friend Amber, about one of your fellow, military families that she lived across the street, correct?
Yes, in this little cul-de-sac. Yeah, right. We could like literally like look in each other's windows. Yeah.
Yeah, and you had noticed just there were patterns that were different that you felt I need to check on my friend here, and just notice that she's living with her children on her own, just like we all are. While you know our spouses are out on a deployment or stationed somewhere, training or wherever, and that you learned how to aid and care for and see the person where they're at and help give her the proper assistance she needed. Like it was one of the best parts of your book. I remember like I said, I was like mowing the lawn, listening to your book, and I'm out there like tearing up. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is such a powerful story. But you taught me to go the extra mile because you had mentioned you felt God prompting you to go a little bit further. Don't just back off and assume everything will be fine. If she needs help, she'll ask for it. You went and used that learning that you just explained to actually be okay with asking eye to eye the hard questions, like how are you doing? So what a crazy thing. And I felt changed from that and feeling like, well, now I have this extra protocol in my head to think about how those that I'm sharing life with might need that deeper care, that deeper level of connection, because they may not be able to see through where they're at. So thank you for sharing that part in your story. So cool.
Oh, well, thanks. That was a really cool experience. Because like you said, you know, it was a friend. So, I mean, first step, you've got to be close enough to someone to be able to see those little red flags, but it doesn't take much. I think we all have that friend that like posts something weird on Facebook and you're like, that feels weird. Like what, like, why did they do that? Like, are they doing something? And I think, like I talked about, like I struggled initially with figuring out what to do because I had the sense something was wrong, but you will convince yourself that you don't want to be nosy. It's none of your business. We're so like programmed to be independent and like, just take care of it. Like you made this bed, you're going to lie in it, like, solve your own problems. That the thought that we would ask someone if they are not able to handle their current situation feels insulting. Like, I don't want to insult her by implying that she can't handle her own life. But the reality is like a lot of people in our lives are are having trouble, right? And sometimes they just need like a hug, or someone to be like, this feels off. Are you are you okay? That was a really cool experience. Certainly the most like real life way I've ever been able to step into someone's life and tangibly, like, for those of you who I hope everybody reads the book, but if you haven't read the book, like pretty much a friend and I stepped into this friend's life in a very tangible way. She was drowning, and literally put her kids to bed, like restored law and order to what was happening in their life. And it was a sacrifice on our part because it took time away from our own families and stuff, but it was a joy to do it. And she was so open. Also, I think the lesson there of like, she recognized she was drowning and she accepted that help. And she was like, okay, I'm a mess. Like, and she wasn't afraid to let us see the mess. And she was not less in my mind or because of that. In fact, if anything, it was so impressed. Like I was impressed how brave she was to let us see how much help she needed. And so there's kind of lessons on both ends of that, because that's what I needed to learn, so that when I needed help, when Drew was in space and I was overwhelmed and I just like, I have 4 kids, I got a million things I got to do. And this just a stressor of single parenting, and Drew's calling me, they're crazy out. I mean, it's just like, it was just a weird season. And several people stepped into my life in a way that was just so awesome. And what I loved about it is they did kind of what I did with my friend Amber, which is they weren't like, let me know how to help. Because you'd always be like, I'm fine. They were like, I'm bringing dinner every Monday. Like I love talking up my friend Anne, who was this lovely woman in my life. Like, she brought us dinner. She called me up. Like she wasn't a great friend. She was just a woman from my church who I kind of knew laterally. And she was like, hey, I want to bring you dinner every Monday while Drew's in space. And I was like, what? like that sounds insane. Like, he's like, who offers to bring you dinner every Monday for 9 months? Like, and I was like, and it wasn't like a pizza. It was like, she'd call and she'd be like, but what I loved about it is she was like, well, it's happening. Like, just it's happening. And so your choice is like this or this for like your main dish, like, and just know, do you want vanilla or chocolate ice cream for dessert? And it was like, well, chocolate, of course. So, and it was such a tangible way to support us. And here's what I also loved about that I've taken from it. She used to bring her food and she'd be like, okay, here it is, like give a little instruction. And then she would leave. She didn't try to make it about her or make it like fill a need for her, like, and she was like, I'm here to deliver this. Like, you have any questions? Great. How's it going? Great. And she was like out in 5 minutes. And I have to remind myself of that too. When I help people, like I'm helping to help them, not to like scratch my own need for conversation or to feel awesome. Like, it just needs to be to help that person. And, so, as we head into the holiday season, this is always a good reminder that the holidays are really hard for a lot of people, and no one's going to tell you that it's hard. But just be like, hey, I'm bringing you dinner, or I'm mowing your lawn on Tuesday, just so you know, like, so when you see me mowing your lawn, like, don't freak out. It's just me. like, like, don't be afraid to ask the hard questions, step into people's lives. They'll fight you a little bit initially, but if they're your friend, they'll accept it. And that's what friends do, and that's how you build like really awesome relationships with people. And we had to do that a lot at NASA, a lot of needs for, it's hard when in the military, it's hard too, because we're just so independent, so proud of our independence, and we don't want to see as a burden. Nobody wants to be that high maintenance family, can't get their act together. So no one's going to raise their hand and say, I need help. So this is, like, look out for your friends, look out for your neighbors. And if you're like, well, I wouldn't know if they were struggling, then maybe that's a little call on us maybe to pay closer attention and build stronger relationship, like more intimate relationships with people, so that we would know if something's wrong, or if something's off norm.
Yeah. When you at the top of your story, you talked about how you felt that prompting from God to encourage you to go deeper with Amber. After you went through that experience of helping her for months on end and including other friends and kind of creating this new lifestyle to support her, what was your faith experience following that event? How did you change? How did your connection with God change in that?
Yeah, I think like a lot of independent people, I always, I always saw when I read Bible verses about like, helping others and receiving and giving help, I was always like, well, I'm the giver of help. Like, you're welcome, America. Here I come. Like, I'm coming to help you, and prepare to like knock your socks off. I'm about to love you to death. And but seeing Amber in her most vulnerable, like she was so vulnerable, she was at rock bottom, and to accept the level of help, she was so humble. But it was like it changed how I view the word humble, which you read about a lot in the Bible and a lot of other things like what does that mean? And she was like still strong, like she was super strong. She was a former Marine, for goodness sakes. Like she's like not a strong person. Not that she wasn't a strong person, like, but she was humble enough to be like, I need help, and it's okay that I need help. And so that changed my view of myself and also how I view like my faith. Like, God has made me a very independent, high capacity person, but that doesn't mean that when I need help, I'm not like good enough or something like that. Like, and so that there are seasons when you are the giver and like, yeah, it's your job to get in there and clean house and take care of business. And then there are seasons where you need help. And I'm so glad I learned that lesson because I needed it when Drew was in space. I needed it on the launch trip. I needed it afterwards, like during, and I needed it after. And like, it did change. Like I need to be better at asking for help, both from other people and even like in my faith. Like it's okay to be like, I don't even know what's going on right now, but I'm not handling it and I need help. Like, and it's okay. It doesn't mean I'm a failure. Doesn't mean I'm a friend manipulator. It doesn't mean anything. It just means I need help. Like, it's okay. There is a season for both.
Sure.
I'm so grateful you shared that because I feel like, especially under the climate that we're in now, I think the idea of asking for help, it needs to be more normalized. And in hindsight, there have been times where I would refuse help. And similar to Nick, when you were sharing your story about listening to it and getting emotional, I felt the same way because, for one, I always like to think, well, what would have happened if I'd never even made that attempt to even help? How like where would that have gone? And unfortunately, we see a lot of that, and it's only until after something really tragic happens or something terrible that we start saying, "Oh man, I wish I would have," But it does take a little bit of willpower to ask. But I think you sharing this lesson, I hope it kind of makes it feel more normal because we work better as a community, and that's coming from someone who likes to be independent. I realize there are certain things that I like doing by myself, and I'm okay with just taking the wheel. But there are a lot of times where I am just so hard-headed. I just don't want to surrender and say, you know what, man, give me a hand. Like, and whenever I have those moments, I always say, like, Tan, you're being so silly. Like that, it wasn't that bad just to ask for a little bit of help. So I'm very grateful you shared that because it's an important lesson. I think, again, like the world we live in now, I think we all could use a little bit of help and a helping hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've shared so many stories about navigating deep and hard things. You also shared a little bit in your book about learning to find new ways to have fun.
Yeah.
And I love some of those stories you share. You talk about trying to redefine, like when you're on your own, whether your spouse is deployed or in space, like you got to find ways to live your life without your person, and you kind of a story about rollerblading. I can't remember which one it was.
Yes.
And just experimenting with ways to try something new, and to literally be okay with falling on your butt while doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, that's right.
And and also you have a story about going skydiving,
That's right.
trying to redefine what fun means in your life and embracing just complete insanity. And I love you shared that whole experience in your book about what that's like and how, you know, Drew and the kids were there, and but the example that it set for them. Can you talk about the skydiving experience a little bit?
Sure.
And how that impacted your kids?
Yes. Okay. So I love talking about my skydiving story. Actually, I'm working on my next manuscript, and it's all kind of coming off of that story, because this idea of risk is so interesting to me. Because culturally, like, we're kind of told that as we get older, we should be trying to minimize the amount of risk we have in our life, right? We should be getting more comfortable, more settled, like deeper roots, like just feather your nest until you're like so cozy that you never want to go anywhere. And but I kind of like pose the question, well, what if that's not actually how we've been designed to live? Like, what if actually that may be what our culture is saying, but what if we're designed to actually, as we get older, take bigger and smarter risks? Doesn't mean like you're just like doing crazy, stupid things, but like, what if we're supposed to take all the experience that we've had of all these years living on Earth, and then use that wisdom to continue to take bigger and smarter risks? And so I think skydiving is the perfect example of this. So when I turned 40, I came up with this list of things I wanted to do. Now, I had gone skydiving before, years earlier, like when we were newlyweds and we had like no assets and like nothing. So it was like, and Drew's an experienced skydiver, and but I decided to do it again at 40, and it felt very different at 40 than it did like at 25. And because now all of a sudden, like, I have responsibilities, and I have property, and I have a mortgage, and I, you know, like all these things. And so I thought, like, well, I'm going to invite all my friends, and they're all going to take, like, they're going to be like, yes, like, I'm joining you. And none of them did. They were all like, oh, what, like, you know, again, the reading between the lines questions, same questions you got when you was launching, right? Like, well, and really what they were asking was like, what if you jump out of the plane and the parachute doesn't open and you die, right? And so what's interesting about skydiving, tandem skydiving in particular, is that the risk of being killed in a tandem skydive is like so small. And you can look up the stats. It's incredibly small. Like, the people who die skydiving or get seriously injured are usually people who are doing like crazy tricks, and they've got bazillions of jumps, you know what I mean? Like, so it's very unusual to have an incident. And yet for most people, like, if you ask them, what's the riskiest thing you could ever do? They'll say skydiving. But that's not actually true. Like, you have a far greater risk of dying driving on the highway wherever you live, you know, like, or eating bad sushi. I mean, there's 100, you know, like, but in our minds, the fact that you like physically have to jump out of a plane feels riskier, right? And so the story is about how, like, I asked all my friends, they were like, it was like crickets, like, no. And then this one friend took me up on it. And so we went and we did it, and we paid to have the video, and like, it was awesome. And it, you know, we made our kids watch the video like 6 times. It was great. But it was, you know, to me, it's the perfect like illustration of how most of us view risk, which is like, we decide we will accept risk here, but not over here. But our perspective is all wrong. Like, we're picking things that just like based on our guts, and our gut is wrong like 9% of the time. And it could be as simple as like, well, I want to take that job, but it's on the other side of the country, so it feels very risky. Or I want to start a cool podcast, but I don't know, I'm afraid to it feels very risky to put myself out there and where people can criticize you, right? Or to write a book, or to quit a relationship, or whatever. Like, they attach all this risk to it, but the reality is that it's not nearly as risky as we think it is. And we're super focused on this tiny chance of failure, when there's like a 99% chance the fact that it's going to be awesome. Like, even if it doesn't turn out exactly the way you wanted it, right? Like, look, this book is, I love this book. It's not a New York Times bestseller, right? But does that mean that I love it. Everybody on your podcast bought it and became a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah.
But, as of today, right? As of this moment, like, it is not a New York Times bestseller. Does that mean it wasn't awesome writing it? Of course not. Like, and it was still risky, but like, it was still awesome. And so, in fact, so it changed how I view risk in my life. Like, am I actually afraid of the right things? Like, are these things really as risky as they are? And am I focused more on this tiny percent of failure instead of the much more likely scenario that it's going to be awesome in some shape or form instead? And when you shift your perspective, it changes how you make decisions, like big and little. And so, that calculus, like if you think of it almost like a brain formula with like a risk factor, and then it spits out an answer, are you going to do it or not? Like, we got the wrong numbers plugged into that formula. And so it's spitting out no's when it should be spitting out yeses, because the likelihood of failure is actually very small. And even if you fail, the cost of that failure is actually usually very, very small, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so you write that book and nobody buys it. Who cares? Right? Like, so you take that job and you don't like it. And so you go back to your old job. Okay. Mm-hmm. Like, so, you like start that thing, and the worst case that happens is you're a little embarrassed. Okay. I mean, those are not like ending outcomes, right. And that's, I talk about how I think people assume like that people like Drew, like my husband, are like, that we're like risky people, like, oh my gosh, you jump out of planes, like strap yourself to rockets, you like, do all these things. And it's not true. Like, we are really good calculated risk takers.
Yes.
And I think our life has put us through some experiences where God has given us the opportunity to have some experiences that have just opened the aperture of to getting a more clear view of where are the risks in the world. And actually they're not as big as you think they are over here. They're actually a lot smaller over here. And so what's the worst that could happen? Usually nothing compared to what our imagination actually thinks. So like, let's start taking these risks. Let's take smarter risks. So people thought, when we told them we're moving to this small island in the middle of the Pacific, people thought we were crazy, absolutely crazy. Why would you do that? Right?
Yep. Because
in their mind, they're thinking about is the 1% chance that we get here and we don't like it or it's bad, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, but what about the 99% chance that we get here and it's awesome? Right. And it like changes our family forever in a good way and whatever. And that's what's happened. Doesn't always mean there isn't challenges or whatever, but like, it's been great. But absolutely, like, I always think of it like you have to often let go of something before you can grab onto the next thing. And the scary part is that free fall time in between, right? Mm-hmm. Like, yes. And that's what people are afraid of, right? Like, and so you just have to have like faith that like, I'm going to let go of this, and it's going to feel very risky to let go because there's going to be a free fall moment where it's like, oh, my stomach is in my chest. Mm-hmm. But like, if I just wait 30 seconds, the parachute's going to open, and then the view will be amazing. Like, and it will have been the ride of a lifetime. I just think, like everybody should go skydiving. This is why I think everybody should go skydiving, because just one time, because forcing yourself through that mental calculus of risk of jumping out of an airplane, it will change the mental calculus you bring to other decisions in your life in terms of what risk am I really afraid of the right things? Like,
right.
This really is risky as I think,
That reminds me of a story. I remember listening to a TED Talk by astronaut Chris Hadfield talking about fear and risk assessment of fear. And he compared, the process, everything you just explained, talking about if you're afraid of spiders, like, of course, if you get a spider web on you, you're going to freak out because you think the spider's on you. But if you do the the math and the statistics of it, the odds that the spider's actually on you are slim. It's just white fluffy stuff. So what are you so afraid of? And then if you take it a step further, the spider, even if the spider is there, the odds of it being venomous are, single digit % of all the spiders in the area. So even if you had one on you, it wouldn't be venomous. And if it were venomous, the odds of those being lethal venomous or like, necrotic level venomous are even smaller.
Right.
So like, what are you really afraid of? And he said, if you walk through enough spider webs, you eventually overcome that fear. You rewrite the psychological processes in your head.
Yes.
And then you'll confidently walk through spider webs going forward. So I'm going to go skydiving now.
Hey, let's do it right after the
Do
show.
it, do it. Yes.
Right after the show, baby.
Yeah, it's really true. I mean, and then when you meet people, like once you start changing that calculus in your head, you'll now see it in other people. You can see the people who also have a changed calculus. And then, but like disclaimer, you'll recognize the people in your life who are making really poor risk assessments. And you'll be like, and then it can be very frustrating sometimes because you're like, listen, just try it. Like, just do it. And they're like, I just can't. And you're like, how do I convince you to jump whatever it is, right? Like, it's very hard and they have to make their own decision. But it's, it's like trying to convince someone, like, there's something so much better out there for you. Like, I don't know. I can't convince you, like, you have to experience it for yourself, but like, you're afraid of the wrong thing. And it's you may not even realize how that fear and that improper risk calculation is actually like, it's minimizing the good things in your life. Like, you're not even seeing all the full opportunities that you could be taking advantage of because you're choosing comfort over or just consistency. Like, I just want the same thing every day, like, but what if there's more to life than that for you?
Yeah.
And some people are like, no, I don't care. I don't want there to be more to life for me. And you're like, okay, that's your choice. But just know that, like, what if not though, like,
yeah. Humans are we're so interesting that we do these things. It seems like this fear, it often comes from just labeling situations as like good or bad. Like, there's these two things. And I feel like just accepting things like as they are can reduce, the fear of the unknown. And at the end of the day, like, one event can lead to outcomes that we simply can't foresee. So I agree with you. I think we just have to stop labeling things as good or bad and just accept them like as they are at face value.
Yeah. I mean, everybody thinks, it's funny, even on when Drew was in space, people assumed that like every day that he was in space was awesome. Right?
Yeah.
Just like every day when he was in a combat zone, people assumed was terrible. And like how do I explain to you that he had awesome days when he was deployed to combat zones, like some of the best days of his life. And he had some days on the space station that were like the most frustrating, annoying, like, days ever, like, and like, it's not all or nothing, right? It's both. And like, if we don't, like, like you said, you got to come into it being like, let's take a risk. And if it doesn't work out, there's still going to be good things that come out of it, even if it's not even the outcome that we thought. We could never have imagined what 9 months in space would do. We could never have imagined that I was going to write this book or that we were going to end up here in the Pacific or any of those things, But just by having the mindset of like, well, let's take a moment and think about it. What's the worst that could happen, right? What are we afraid of? And then realizing, actually, those aren't so scary. Like, let's risk it. Let's do it. Because the risk is actually very small. Like, look at this grand adventure that we've been taking on, starting even just with his choosing to apply to the space program. Like, those are all just calculated risks that when you're willing to do it, who knows where you're going to end up.
Right? Literally in the stars.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man. This is all amazing. Oh, my goodness.
I'm going to go out and do all the craziest things that I've always wanted to do. Why not?
Oh, man.
Why not?
Oh, cool. So Stacey, the last thing I kind of want to cover with you before we wrap up is your current journey, like where you're at right now.
Yeah,
You're working with an organization called Momco. Can you tell us about
that's
that
right.
and how you're applying what you've learned in these experiences you've shared to what you're doing right now?
Yeah, so I've worked for the Momco for a while. I was a volunteer for them for a long time. Momco is a nonprofit that's focused on the unique needs of moms. On staff, I have a couple of different hats, but one of the ones that I'm a leadership coach, and but one of them is I also focus on military moms, and so I help develop resources and get moms connected into community that they need. Military moms are unique in that because you move around a lot and you're often not in your family, that means sometimes you can struggle to have the support that you need. And so I want to get every military mom plugged into community that she needs. So it's a great job. It's been very flexible for me as I take it all around. They've always been great. I like shout out to my boss Sherry, who has always been like when I was like, hey, I'm moving, can I continue to do this job? Oh, by the way, I will be in tomorrow. And she was like, yeah, let's figure it out. Like, big shout out to all the remote working, flexible bosses out there who make life possible for those of us who live these crazy lives. But yeah, it's a great job. I love it. I love the organization. I love their mission. I plan on being with them for a long time to get every mom connected. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, that's so cool. So I think I read that you want to have like every mom that's on every military base, U.S. military base, like have access to this. Like that's quite the feat.
Well, yeah. I mean, that will take some divine intervention for sure, more than just my efforts. But yeah, I mean, the stats don't lie. You can Google the stats for military families and some very serious challenges they face in terms of staying connected to community and feeling isolated. And COVID only made that worse. And a lot of support programs that existed before COVID kind of dissipated or disappeared afterwards. And so, it's a problem, not just like for families in terms of getting them the emotional support they need. Moms are often, there are many women who serve in the military, but vast majority, tend to skew more towards the men being the service member. But either way, it's often the mom, whether she's the service member or the spouse, who is carrying kind of like holding the house of popsicle sticks together. And so if she's suffering, everybody suffers and the whole community starts to suffer. And that actually becomes a problem. Like why this is of interest to someone who's not in the military. If you're like, why do I care about this? Well, because when military families start to be under strain, that affects our military readiness, our retention, all kinds of problems downstream. And when the military is under that strain, we can't respond to real national, threats to our country in the way that we would want to. So all these things matter. And but I'm focused on the mom part. I want to get every mom connected. I wish it would be my dream that on every military installation worldwide, there are thousands of U.S. military, hundreds at least of military installations worldwide. I would love it if there was a Momco group on every base so that when that mom's like, I need help, I need community, I need people and friends, like I'm lonely, that they could literally walk down the street and join that group. So little by little, we're, hey, if you're a military leader, call me. Like, let's get it started.
Yes, let's go.
Yeah, that's right. I should also mention, if you don't mind me plug in this important point about my book, which is,
yes.
So after I wrote the book, I set up a 501 trust account. So all of my proceeds from the book, I put directly into that 501 charitable fund and I have designated that, or decided all that money goes to support charities that support military families. Mm-hmm. So I don't keep any of that money. I push it off and donate it to charities. And so I always say, like, if you like the book, awesome, like buy 10 copies and give one to all your friends. If you don't like it, well, the worst thing that happened is you made a little donation to support military families. So
that's awesome. Stacey, how do you approach outreach other than podcasts? Do you do anything else?
Yeah. So I have a website, staceymorgan2000.com. And then of course, a lot with my work, like for the Mom Co, I do a lot of writing and leadership coaching and speaking that way. When I'm back in the States, obviously I'm not doing a lot of public speaking out here. I'd be talking to the same 5 people. I do talk at at a lot of like women's conferences and stuff like that. Yeah, that's always the challenge, right? Podcasts are awesome. As I learned when I was going through the marketing, it was very painful marketing period of a book. It's always very, very awkward and painful. I actually asked the question, like, how do we sell books now? Like, that's weird. Seems like a basic question, but like even Costco is like cutting down on the number of books that they sell. And so if you're not like John Grisham, how do if I'm not on Oprah's book list, or if I'm not whatever, like how do you sell books? And what I found to be very interesting was that pretty much the top way to sell books is podcasts. That's how people hear about books. So thank you for inviting me on.
A million other sales.
That would be awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, I was. If you didn't say it, I was 100% going to be talking about that, because I think that's such a cool aspect of your book, and I have no doubt that there are tons of people who tune into us who would be so into purchasing it and helping support the cause that you're supporting. So if you're out there listening to this at any point in history, please go pick up a copy of The Astronaut's Wife. It is a fantastic story, and you're supporting many more people around the world that you may never meet in a very, very wonderful way. So
that's right.
Oh man. Well, Stacey, this was a fantastic conversation. I want to keep going. I don't want to stop, because I know there's so much more exciting content to go over with you. But I think we should bring it home here, and we just want to thank you for making the time to be on our show, for sharing your unique view through your galactic window. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it so much. I hope your podcast is a huge success. I'm sure it will be. This is absolutely, like, I love the concept. I love all of it. So I'm happy to come back anytime you want.
That'd be amazing. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
The funny thing was, I didn't mention this earlier. So there was sort of a weird connection that happened about a month ago. So my sister had texted me randomly, and she's like, "Hey, do you know astronaut Drew Morgan?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I know Drew Morgan." I was like, "Yeah, I listened to his wife's book." She's like, "Oh yeah, well I know she works for a publishing company," and she's like, "I'm actually gonna be working a conference in Colorado, and Stacey Morgan's gonna be there." And I was like, she's like, "Do you want me to like say hi to her?" I'm like, "Oh please, that'd be great." So we sort of got connected that way, and ended up reaching out, and it was a cool connection. So shout out to Stephanie for helping reinvigorate.
Thanks, Stephanie.
The connection. Yeah. So thanks for talking with her, Stacey, and being willing to be with us. It's kind of a full circle moment here now.
Right.
So grateful for you. All right. Well, we're going to exit here, and we're going to wrap up the show here. So thank you, Stacey. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right. When are we going skydiving, Tom?
Right now. Let's go. I'm pumped. Man.
Yeah. Oh, it's always great to meet somebody who's lived extra steps in life that you haven't, and so you can hear the story, live vicariously through it, and then be inspired to do amazing things. So I'm certainly feeling the momentum now.
Yeah. It's crazy how just one person's story of billions of people on this earth could have such an impact and make you feel certain emotions, and just make you want to go skydiving or whatever it is. Reach out to a friend, check up on them. Humans are incredible, really. There's a lot of, sometimes things can get pretty weird, but I will always, lean towards the optimistic side of that. We creatures can really make a difference, and what an incredible person.
Mm-hmm. Well, and whoever you are listening, never underestimate your story too. The things that you're doing, the ability that you have, the skills you have, the people you know, and the potential impact that you can make on someone else's life. I think we will often write ourselves off as being useless or not strong enough, powerful enough, smart enough, whatever, pick a word. It's just not true. So, go be a Stacey, out in the world to somebody else. You can do it. And you never know like when someone else might show up for you too. So believe in the power of your story.
Yeah. Take a little risk.
Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, man. Well, cool. So you guys, if you've made it this far into the podcast, thanks for sticking with us all the way through. We greatly appreciate your support. And on that note, I do want to kind of let you guys know how you can continue to support the Galactic Window. First and foremost is engagement. Be giving us those thumbs up if you enjoy the episodes. Comment something that you learned while listening. Leave a comment below on each of the videos. And share these podcast episodes with your friends. Let them know that, hey, there's might be a nugget here that you might enjoy or a story that I thought was cool. That helps out so much. Also, watching replays. If you missed an episode, missed last week, go back and watch it. Give it a listen. Or if you just catch up, start at the first episode and make your way all the way back up to episode 25. That helps so much with the channel growth, communicating to YouTube, hey, this podcast is worth watching. And lastly, if this is not for everybody, and by no means there's no pressure here, but some people like to support things financially. And if you do want to support us with kind of a donation or a gift to support the podcast, you can do that on YouTube directly. There's, I think, a little thanks button or a super button. They're called super chats and super thanks. And you can, I think there's one under the video. And if you're watching it live, I think the live stream chat, there's a button there. So you do not have to do anything like that if you don't want to, just letting you know that is there, and it will all directly go right back into helping improve the podcast and give you a better experience as we learn and grow. So just want to make all of that known.
It'll also feed Nick with a Crunchwrap Supreme and also get me some boba tea. So just want to make that note there.
Yeah. Yeah, no shame. I need my fill of Taco Bell, so you guys hook us up. And lastly, you can support us on social media. You can follow at The Galactic Window on TikTok, where we post clips and highlights of past episodes. You can support Tan at Chasing the Milk on social media. He does epic live streams of the moon through his telescope, meteor showers with night vision cameras. It's always a good time. You can also support him by buying one of his hoodies on his website, chasingthemilk.com. And then you can find me at the Orbital Alliance on major social media platforms as well. You can find my astrophotography and content about it on there. So we appreciate your support in those ways as well. Tan, do you want to talk about next week? Who's coming up? Who our next guest is?
Ooh, man. Next week is going to be, I feel like I say this every week, but for sure, next week is going to be definitely a stellar guest, because she is a wedding photographer. Why are you guys having a wedding photographer on your space podcast? Well, she doesn't just do normal wedding photos. She does them in the dark. So picture stars, the Milky Way, Northern Lights, and then, bride and groom under the stars. So we have Sophia Catherine, which is, she's based out of, I believe, Alberta, Canada. And she is a nighttime astro wedding photographer. I didn't even know this was a thing, and I am really, really excited to kind of dive into her galactic window and share a little bit insight of how she got started on this. So definitely tune in. What's the date, Nick?
November 25th at 9 p.m. Central Time in the U.S.
There it is. Okay, yeah. So definitely tune in. And again, if you can't, just add it to your watch list. Throw it on while you're cooking food, driving to work, in the shower, whatever. I have like 10 phones going that are constantly streaming their own videos. So help us, please.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm so looking forward to that one. I want to learn how that all works. I want Sophia to take me to school.
It'll be fun.
It'll be a good time. All right. Well, thank you for listening, everybody. Good to have you all here. And as we always say, we will see you all on the other side.